Hello and welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another Historical Humans Reacts. And today we're pulling a unique article out of left field, but it's a very interesting concept and something we love to talk about. And it is why a large part of ancient Rome is underground today. And this would give us a good excuse to talk about stratigraphy and about soil deposition. So, a lot of interesting things to talk about.
Yeah, one of the most common concepts with archaeology that is a general question involved in the field is why is everything underground? Why is everything buried?
I know the answer to that.
Yeah.
It's because we're all dwarves and we like to diggy diggy hole.
No,
Oh.
no, no, it is not that. Well, there's a one dated Yogscast reference there.
But it basically what this article talks about is how the soils end up getting deposited. And with Rome specifically, I mean, we'll just talk base level before we even dive into it, but some aspects of ancient Rome are up to 10 meters beneath the surface, which is roughly about 30 to 33 feet deep. And the one of the big reasons for that is because Rome quite literally is built on a marsh in a riverine floodplain. They're built right next to the Tiber River, and effectively, rivers like to flood, and when they flood, they move a lot of dirt.
Yes, so yeah, the original Roman Forum is actually built on a marsh. It is supposed to be submerged most of the year. It is not.
You know, humans have this very interesting tendency where they just like to build things next to rivers because you need water to survive and to drink, and it usually makes a good place to acquire food. So a lot of that happened, and one of the interesting things too that also happens is you get these periodic soil deposition episodes, but then you also end up getting these morphing, evolving cities. And this is one of the parts that I think is very cool, is a lot of times you just see things built on top of the old stuff, like almost directly on top of, or there's usually like a period of what is it, decay and crumbling, collapses in, becomes a mound, becomes a dirt pile, and then someone just is like, hey, that's a great place to put a house.
Yep, and that house, of course, ends up being built, say, 2 feet higher than the previous house that was there, which is buried under that dirt. And then, 300 years later, this new house has crumbled. What's left of it gets submerged by dirt because the river or the hillside or whatever it is, the natural sediment deposits build up. And then someone builds on top of that. And when you're talking about the city of Rome, which traces its history back at least 2,600 years, there's a lot of time for a lot of things to get buried and have that sediment build up. We're at, 10 meters here with Rome, but even in other cities, even in modern cities like Chicago, you can see this, where after the Chicago fire, all the street levels got raised. In Seattle, you can actually take tours where you are walking 10, 15 feet underground at what was originally the street level of the town when it was settled.
I mean, there have been some really cool core samples taken in Rome, in Istanbul, and even Jerusalem that you can see the different periods represented in the soils. And that coincides a lot with the urban decline because these buildings would fall into disrepair, they would start crumbling, collapsing, and instead of just like getting rid of it or fully destroying it, people just leveled it and just built on top. And this was also coupled by the fact that Rome specifically is in a very seismically active zone. Earthquakes are exceptionally frequent there, to the point where you would see a lot of large buildings actually collapse and crumble because of that, and eventually just get buried. I mean, the Coliseum didn't completely collapse, but a good section of it is destroyed because of an earthquake, and I think that earthquake was actually fairly recent, like 1979.
Yeah, I'm not sure when that earthquake was, but regardless, Italy itself is effectively just a volcanically active peninsula, and that tends to breed a lot of natural disasters.
And then probably the most frustrating one that can usually happen is the human aspect. A lot of times, especially in the Middle Ages and even in the Renaissance, they would pilfer these ruins, these buildings, for their raw materials. I mean, you see that a lot in the fringes of the Roman Empire where former roads or guardhouses were pillaged and you see the stones repurposed into a local cottage. But
Yep.
this would happen a lot too on religious sites where temples were effectively raided for their goods and taken and built in massive cathedrals or churches after the conversion to Christianity.
Yeah. Hell, the Coliseum spent time throughout the Renaissance and Middle Ages as a church and a theater. So it was doing all sorts of things aside from, its intended purpose of blood sports. And
But
also, like also too with the pilfering by humans. One fun fact to know is when Napoleon in the 19th century, I believe, enters Rome, he does not realize it, but he is entering a city at 1/10 of its population during the Roman Empire. It's at one, so you've got 1/10 of the people living in the same space. A lot of things are going to get buried and neglected and allowed to just have that dirt pile up over them because, you don't need a city of 1 million people. You need a city of 150,000.
what is kind of cool about this and what it does mean is a lot of times with this build up and with this burial, it can actually preserve a lot of things in place and they can remain intact over the millennia and over the centuries in which it's almost perfectly preserved in the ground. And I mean, not everything is like organic materials, cloths, ropes, linens. Those don't tend to survive that great over the centuries, but if it's a man-made object that's inorganic, usually it's got a pretty good chance of survival when buried. And the cool part about this is a lot of modern construction projects unearth a lot of archaeology. As Cullen mentioned, a lot of the city was much larger during the Roman period, so they're building subways, they're building high rises, and they're coming across these ancient buried sites, and it's producing so many cool artifacts and so much interesting research into the everyday life of everyday Romans. And I think that's one of the things that we need more of because a lot of the research that people are widely aware of is studies of the elites of those societies, not the everyday schmucks, not the everyday Joes.
Yeah, who would want to study ordinary people, right? It's not like they make up 95% of the human race.
I just want to see what Marcus the peasant was doing, not Julius Caesar, you know?
I'll tell you what he was doing. He was scrabbling that graffiti we see on the walls of Pompeii.
Marcus was here, a few phallic
Um,
objects nearby.
yes, yes. All the articles we talk about tourists behaving badly, where we get mad at them, that was human beings throughout every single time period.
Roman graffiti would be indistinguishable from middle school graffiti currently. There were your mom jokes, there were people writing their names saying that they were there, and there were phallic drawings. The Romans were just middle schoolers, effectively. And to be fair, a lot of them were.
That's that's different. That's you have caves in Shenandoah Valley with Civil War soldiers scratching their names into stalactites. You got you got it everywhere really with all societies. It just people just like to scribble on things, and it's a serious problem we have as a species. And now these scribbles are buried, some 30 feet under the ground.
And on that great note, I think that's a good point for us to wrap up this episode. If we figured it'd be a good idea to talk about something just a little different, mix things up. And it's a really interesting topic because a lot of times we know things are buried, but How did they get buried? What was the depositional process? And that's one of the things archaeologists study, is they look at how things were buried so we can unravel. But thank
Yeah,
you guys for...
there's not some guy coming through whose job is to take a shovel and bury everything because it's old for the archaeologists later. That's not an employment career. That's not something people do. No, it's
Well,
natural.
see, that's the best part about being an archaeologist, is when we fill it back in, I like to leave something completely random and out of place, so that way it'll confuse the future ones. But thank you guys for watching. We'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.